very day for them. Thank you. I'm not sure now, yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please remain seated. I have to, under new code of meeting practice, read out a small screed. In opening the meeting, this meeting is recorded and live streamed for public viewing via the internet in accordance with Council's code of meeting practice, with the recording stored and made available to the public for later viewing. The recording is subject to copyright. Members of the public attending or speaking at this meeting will be recorded and publicly broadcast. By attending this meeting, you voluntarily consent your attendance and participation being recorded. Any part of the meeting that is held in closed session will not be live streamed. Council requests that everyone present is respectful and uses appropriate language. Council does not accept liability for any defamatory, discriminatory or offensive comments that are made during the course of the meeting. Please ensure that all electronic devices, including mobile phones, are switched to silent. Under the Code of Meeting Practice, public recording of this meeting is prohibited without prior authorisation by Council. Council's live streaming of meeting via Facebook is designed to encourage constructive dialogue. We remind users to be digitally responsible and respect their fellow posters. We ask users to keep comments relevant and not to spam or post personal or commercially sensitive information. This includes content that may be defamatory, derogatory, offensive or discriminatory towards council employees, councillors and other persons or organisations. Failure to follow Facebook house rules will result in comments being deleted, and if this behaviour persists, the users will be blocked. Can I ask you all to be upstanding for the opening of the meeting, please? And with Councillor Peter Nelson doing acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respect to elders both past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. And the opening prayer by the Reverend Gavin Perkins from the Barrel Anglican Church. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let me lead us in prayer. Almighty God, we humbly ask that you might grant your special blessing to this council this afternoon. We ask that you be pleased to direct and prosper the work of your servants to the advancement of your glory and to the true welfare of the people of the Southern Highlands. Thank you on behalf of all those who are gathered here today. Thank you for your many and abundant blessings. Thank you for the beauty of the Southern Highlands expressed so wonderfully in events like the Tulip Festival. We thank you for life itself, for the measure of health that we have and need to fulfil our callings, for sustenance and for friendship. We give you thanks for the recent rainfall and pray there might be more drought-breaking rain throughout our region and state. We pray for our Mayor, for the council officials and this assembled council. Graciously grant those gathered today wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues of our times, a sense of the welfare and needs of the people in our local area, a thirst for justice and rightness, and the ability to work together in harmony even where there is honest disagreement. Above all, give those gathered here today peace in their own lives and joy in their task. In all these responsibilities, enable those gathered to use their authority to serve well. And it's in the name of the blessed name of our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ, that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend. Before I sit down and continue on, Council held a civic reception last Friday week for the ambassador from Australia to the Netherlands, Mr. Matthew Newhouse, and he presented Council with a Delft tulip vase. And as such, they like looking at their tulips on an individual basis, and as such, one of the staff went down and desecrated the tulips down the front and so we could present. So Just, that is why the tulips are up here today. Now, if we go to page 1, councillors, please, of the business paper, we go for apologies, and there has been a printing error in the apology section, and it says Councillor Markward intends to be absent from all commitments on Wednesday the 25th. It should read from Wednesday the 25th until 3 months hence, which will be the 25th of October, November, December. So it is for all commitments between now and 25th of December for personal reasons.
Mr Mayor?
Councillor?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to move that, Mr Mayor. I have had some correspondence with Councillor Marquardt, and yes, I think it should be noted that he is unwell, doesn't want that broadcast around, apart from he won't be here because that's right, he's unwell. So that's the reason. So
Yes,
I'm happy to move that these apologies be accepted.
And seconded, Councillor Scandrett. Yes, for health reasons, so, and we'll leave it at that. Is there any further debate or issues? And before I put it, this does not stop Councillor Markward at any time attending a council meeting, just the knowledge that he does have the right for that 3 months absence. So put that, all in favour, against, carried. So we now move to declarations of interest. Councillor... No, we will get to... oh yes, we do, sorry, I'm one ahead of myself there. Adoption of the previous minutes, moved by Councillor Halstead, no. Councillor Whipper, seconded as the correctness, then they can be debated.
Well, I think
Councillor Nelson, Councillor Halstead.
yeah. Well, I need to correct it because look at page 5, and the same sort of thing is stated on page 8. It says the Council House has declared a less than significant non-pecuniary interest in item 9.2, etc. I did not do that. I left the chambers, and there's a reason I left the chambers. It's got nothing to do with a conflict of interest, and therefore should not be in that minute. I took advice on this, and I knew what the answer was before I took the advice, but there was no conflict of interest there. Now, I'm quite happy to debate conflict of interest with a whole lot of you at a later date, but not now. But I did not declare it interest because there wasn't a conflict of interest.
Right, what item number, please, sorry?
That was 9. Sorry, it's in the declarations, so that's on page
5, yes.
And then it was under 9.1, which is then the item referred to, or the part referred to is on page 8. It's listed under the council standard. He may have had one before he had one, but I certainly didn't. Thank you.
9.8.
We're still talking about that one, Mr Mayor.
Okay, so subject to declared a less than significant non-pecuniary interest in item 9.2, I've got it here, DA, and that is 12 Solomon Street, Renwick.
Yeah, I'm just saying, that line should not be there.
Right,
That's what I'm trying to say.
right.
Or the previous one I point out to you, because the staff have taken it upon their own back to put that in there, probably in their mind.
Probably
for
to
the reason.
protect you, I would
Well,
think,
who
yeah.
knows, but if I'm going to declare an interest, I'll declare an interest, right?
Right,
And I'll do the form, which I didn't, because I didn't have one.
okay, thank you, you
And
make
I'm
your
quite
point.
happy to debate that.
No, we're not going to debate it if Councillor Halstead. So subject to that line item being removed,
Correct.
then that is accepted. Any other incorrectness of the minutes as just been pointed out, then I put that, all in favour, those against, carried. Now we'll go to declarations of interest. Councillor
Chair,
Turnbull.
13.1 legal report and 19.1, as have been in court with counsel. If there's any questions asked by councillors, I will leave the chamber. If not, I'll stay in.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm declaring a non-pecuniary, non-significant interest in item 16.1, the minutes of the Wingecarribee Floodplain Risk Management Advisory Committee meeting held on the 13th of 9th, 2019. I own property in Kirkham Street, Mossvale. However, the property is not affected by flooding from Whites Creek floodplain.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a non-pecuniary, non-significant interest in item 12.2, page 112, and that's a planning proposal to reclassify council land for the regional gallery access. I'm a member of the working committee for the Southern Highlands Regional Gallery, Nunangula, and as such I have no pecuniary interest, so I will stay in the chamber and vote on that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Any further declarations of interest? Then there is no mayor or minute. We have public forum, and out of that public forum we have an address in relation to development application 12.1, application number 20/0043, the use of self-contained seniors housing dwelling as an exhibition home as approved in stage 1 of DA 17-1822, and Mr Kevin Ryan will address the council in support of the recommendation. Mr Ryan.
Yep.
Then it's over to you, Mr Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to speak on our DA here. As you know, this is a minor part of the Waterbrook project in Centennial Road, Barrel. We fully support the recommendation by the council officers. We worked hard with them. The villa, the display home itself, is already DA approved in our first stage 1, and this is to enable us to commence immediately with the sales program for the project and to use that display as a display home. And the conditions are acceptable to us and allows us to move forward at a lot faster rate, and I would urge the councillors if they could not make any changes to those conditions there. They work well with the council officers and ourselves, and also providing senior housing a lot faster now after 2 years of working on this project for the senior citizens of Barrel. So I'm happy to take any questions.
It's public forum, and as such we don't have any, there's no questions taken,
Okay.
but thank you for addressing council.
Thank you very much.
Where's the run sheet?
Page 2.
So we go now to visitor item, item 9.1, DA 180576, General Industry Masonry Manufacturing, Lot 1, DP 785111, and Lot DP 414246, 1416 Berrima Road, Moss Vale. Mr Clive West will address council against the recommendation, and Mr Andrew Cohen will address council on behalf of the applicant when he's finished. Thank you, Mr West. Thank you, Mr West.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. I'd like to make clear that we're not opposing the masonry plant as such. We're not opposing it being approved. We're just simply asking for an additional condition of consent, which goes to the matters I'm going to address in this presentation. I'm appearing on behalf of the Berrima Residents Association. In brief, we would like councillors to consider an additional condition of consent to any DA approval, namely to require Austral to plant a 30-metre wide native vegetation corridor around the perimeter of the lot, and to plant a native vegetation habitat corridor along Stony Creek that runs down the centre of the lot. These plantings will address the dust and noise amenity issues for the nearby villages of New Berrima and Berrima. The additional native vegetation condition of consent we are seeking will be a practical on-the-ground means for Council to further its work in addressing climate change. As to amenity, a masonry plant is a particularly noisy and dusty enterprise. This plant will be close to the village of New Berrima and within the sound and wind-blown dust range of the adjacent village of Berrima. Prevailing winds will also blow dust and noise towards Mossvale and Burradoo. Cement dust in particular creates a risk of silicosis. The plant will operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, producing 220,000 tonnes of products per year. There are already noise and dust impacts from the Boral cement works. This masonry plant will have a significant cumulative impact. To ameliorate the noise and dust impacts of the plant, we are asking for a 30-metre wide perimeter planting of native vegetation around the entire lot. This would also provide a visual screening of the heavy industry to maintain to some extent the rural ambience of this location. A central element of town planning in the Shire is to maintain as far as possible the rural character of the Shire, particularly between towns and villages. The masonry plant is to be located to the west of Stony Creek, which is designated by the Shire as riparian Category 2. As a result, the LEP calls for a 30-metre buffer on each side of the creek. This riparian land is important to establishing and maintaining a habitat corridor linking back to the river. The Berrima Residents Association representative on the Boral Community Consultative Committee will be proposing to Boral that it coordinate its environmental work with that of Austral, so that the Boral Habitat Corridor can link the Albury Creek Habitat Corridor back to the river. These important corridors of native vegetation are essential to the connectivity of our national parks and rivers. With rising global temperatures, habitats rise in altitude. The Great Dividing Range will become a Noah's Ark for many species, which is why connectivity is at the heart of the long-term interstate project called the Great Eastern Ranges Corridor. Council can play a part in... Can I just continue? No? Yes, okay, thank you. Council can play a part in this endeavour through the additional condition...
You can't.
I'm sorry, we can't. Okay, okay. I think I've made my
Done
point.
is done. You've made your point.
Okay, no, thanks very much.
You'd have to be very unsure of yourself if you didn't make that.
No, okay. Thank you very much.
Or you can have questions.
Oh, okay, yes.
So that allows that. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thanks very much. Do you have a best guess at what the cost implications are for the company for the request that you've put in, the additional conditions that you're asking for?
No, I don't have a rough cost estimate, but the project is about $30 million, I understand, so it would not be anything, it would be a very, very small
I
fraction.
think the applicant's here, so I hope he's heard that question. I'll ask him that question.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Scandra.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Mr West, in terms of the dust you mentioned, and I've been, just by leading into that, involved in, as some councillors here, with the Boral Reference Group. Dust goes across New Berrima. Is that the same concern you're having here? It lands on cars and houses and it's not monitored?
Yes.
Are you proposing it should be monitored?
It is, well, I think the dust from the masonry plant will be monitored, but there are preventative measures. And I might mention that on the 22nd and 23rd of June, there was a major dust event. They called it a dust event, coming from the Boral Cement Works. And in that event, the filtration system broke down completely. The filters completely stopped working. So for 2 days, cement dust was pouring onto New Berrima. We had a public meeting shortly after that at the RSL in Mittagong, and I have to say the residents in New Berrima were very upset. And there was one lady there who has asthma issues, and other residents were very concerned about silicosis. Dust is and you've now got you'll have a cumulative impact. Boral indicated that they would be happy to increase the native plantings around their plant as a way of screening the dust. And so I think it's a very relevant issue, and I think the cost which has been raised is a relatively minor issue when you think of the health impacts on the residents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor McLaughlin, I think.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks for your presentation, Mr West. Just with regard to, you did mention about a setback of a certain distance. I believe the setback for the from the riparian zone, I think, talking to staff earlier, is actually going to be 40 metres. So would that go some way to satisfying you with regard to that green belt that you would like to see?
Yes.
I think that's the requirement.
Yes.
I think you mentioned 30.
I think my recollection of the LEP is it's 30. It's a category 2. So, yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be 40. So would that go some way to appease your concern?
If it was a total of 40 metres around Stony Creek, that would certainly go a long way to appeasing it, yes.
It is an enterprise zone. You do
Yes.
appreciate that,
Yes.
that council is put a lot of energy and money into
Yes.
creating
Yes.
a zone where people can operate industry.
Yes.
Well, I'm very pleased you're not against the project.
No, we're not against the project, no.
Thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin, and welcome back from your great trip. You look very tanned, relaxed, and full of energy, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Whipper.
So, Mr West, thank you for the presentation. My question is that the community did have a chance to make submissions in relation to this development. Was that part of your submission at that when it was on exhibition?
If I could just thank you, Councillor Whipper. If I could just address that. This came up about almost 2 years ago, and the BRA made a submission, but then we were taken by surprise. We only got a letter about a week ago saying that this is now coming before council. And in the interim, I'm on the Austral Shale Quarry Consultative Committee. In the interim, we were led to understand on that committee that the masonry plant was wasn't going to happen. So we were a bit surprised when it's now come on. So we had to sort of scurry around last week and get things going. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor
Yeah, my turn, yeah. Thank you. Concrete, in this particular plant, it's totally covered within the production of the building. That's where all concrete bricks are actually mixed and made. There's no dust when they make them. There's no quarry. It comes in. So what you've got is everything is going to be produced inside the building. So there is no dust in the building. The only time there's going to be dust, and because it's wet, the bricks come out wet and they go out and dry either in the kiln or go outside. So everything's going to be inside. Everything's going to be inside the building. So I think the only time there's going to be dust will be where the forklifts run around with the blocks on the. That's how I see it. Is that how you understand it? You think it's the manufacturing as well?
Yes, I agree with that. I think the main source of dust will be the traffic through the plant, through the site, and it's going to produce 220,000 tonnes a year. If you look at the scale of the storage, that's a substantial amount of concrete products which are out in the open, subject to weather, with trucks going backwards and forwards.
So it's really the forklifts raising the dust from the concrete on the concrete platform.
Yes.
Not the manufacture of the blocks themselves. That's how I see it.
I agree with that. Yes,
Okay,
I think
so if there's a method of ball keeping that moist,
yeah. Well, I think
damp to keep the dust down, that would be a way of achieving.
that's the reason why the plantings are to keep the dust from going from that. Even with dampening, it's coming up for a dry summer. I'm just not sure to what extent you can keep that damp the whole time. But certainly the screening is meant to stop that dust, yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. No further questions. Councillor Turland. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, great.
Thank you. And now if Mr Andrew Cowan would come forward to address council.
No other questions on the lines.
There you go. Well, thank you. You've been briefed on how long and everything.
Yeah, I'll only 2 minutes.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor, thanks. Councillors, just like to say we've reviewed the report, the conditions, and we have really no further comment. We endorse the report at its full capacity as it's presented. We've reviewed the conditions in detail, and we thank the council staff for their patience and working with us over these past, in excess of 12 months to reach this result. And basically, I'm here if there's any questions that need to be asked, but essentially there's no further changes or clarifications on our part.
Thank you, Mr Cowan. Councillor Turland.
As the question
Question?
you heard me asked on the previous one, how do you think you can mitigate the dust from the vehicles, forklifts running around, placing the blocks in their position? How do you treat that in other places?
Yeah, so I think there's a condition 31 which deals with that. So in any instance, yeah, there's water carts and so forth on the site. This operation, they'd be committed to make sure there's no negative impact in that respect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Happy with that, Councillor McLaughlin?
Yeah, thank you. With regard to the actual quarry, I believe there is a quarry on site where you'll be getting the shale.
Yeah, on the next adjoining property.
Yeah, adjoining
Yeah,
property.
yeah.
So that is something that won't generate noise and dust that'll be a concern to the community?
Well, no, I mean that quarry operates on its own environmental protection licence
It does.
and DA,
Okay.
so it's governed by those conditions.
And if I could stretch this a little bit, Mr Mayor, with regard to you've heard from the community saying if you could extend the riparian zone and do, is that a possibility you could look at? We don't want to put more conditions on you, but it might be something that you take on board.
Well, I think we've worked really closely to avoid, we respect Aboriginal heritage on the site around that creek area, so I believe we comply with the requirements under all legislation, and the development footprint which has been identified, I suppose, gives maximum regard to that area. So I don't believe they'd be looking to modify that in any shape or form.
So it is 40 metres?
Yeah, and we comply with the statutory
All
requirement.
right. Okay, you've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks. Look, as you might have heard, the previous speaker was asking for a green belt of vegetation to provide a buffer between the residents and the industry and act as a refuge and habitat for wildlife disturbed by the industry, and a 30-metre wide native vegetation habitat corridor along Stony Creek that runs down the centre of the lot, plus 30-metre wide perimeter planting of native vegetation around the entire lot. Would you be open to something like that?
I'd have to take instruction from my client on that. I'm only acting in the capacity of consultant to them. However, I mean, we've produced a comprehensive air quality impact assessment, and we would be bound to comply with any EPL requirements under the operation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are bushfire considerations too on the site, and it is a buffer area, so replanting new vegetation where you've got built form is something to be mindful of. So, at this point in time, I can't really give you a definitive answer. I mean, we've given maximum regard to the air quality impacts through the modelling that's been done.
Yep. You have got a perimeter planting though, haven't you?
There is some which exists at present and proposed.
Yeah, but not at 30 metres.
Not at 30 metres. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Cowan, I'm just going to ask the question about dust, specifically monitoring. That's what I was saying before about Boral. There's meant to be some electronic monitoring systems in Australian Avenue. They still haven't been provided.
Yeah.
So I'm...
don't think that's correct.
Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor McLaughlin, the applicant has the right to answer in the way the question is asked.
I don't have to declare anything about Boral because I've never worked for Boral or have any involvement there. No, seriously. And I will send you, Councillor, an email from Boral about exactly that issue that's only a week and a half old, and it accepts the fact that they haven't done that installation.
Thank you, please?
So my question to you, Mr Cowan, is are you proposing, or if necessary, will you install electronic dust monitoring if there is a need for that? I see what the conditions are. They seem to cover it quite well in terms of the site, but as we've heard, there's extreme...
No, not what we've heard. The question, you've asked the question, Councillor Scandrett. I've allowed the embellishment in the previous little bit. Can you answer the question, please?
I don't believe that electronic monitoring is proposed by the applicant, by the developer in this instance, nor do the conditions contemplate it, so we wouldn't follow through with that. We would comply with the conditions in full as they're proposed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turland,
I'll move the motion, but a briefing
Okay, well, we'll leave that there. No further questions to Mr Cowan? Thank you very much.
Is he done?
As this is a very large industrial development for the enterprise zone, I think it would be quite appropriate to have a
Mr Wilton?
fairly comprehensive introduction. Through you, Acting General Manager, Mr Wilton.
Through the Chair, the purpose of this report is to consider DA 180576, which seeks development consent for the purpose of a masonry plant at 416 to 524 Berrima Road, Berrima. The site occupies an area of approximately 51 hectares and is located adjacent to other industrial premises such as Broyle Cement Works and also Ingham's poultry processing plants. The site is generally cleared and is traversed by a local creek line, Stony Creek. Councillors will be aware that the Minister of Planning granted development consent in 2012 for the purpose of the new Berrima Shale Quarry, which was subsequently modified in July of 2017. A number of those conditions that have been applied to that consent are relevant for the proposal currently before Council this evening. The merits of this proposal includes the manufacturing of masonry blocks, retaining walls and pavers with an annual production rate of 220,000 tonnes per annum and the employment of up to 38 staff. There's apparently 50,000 square metres of hardstand storage area, 11,000 square metres of production building. There's also earthworks, retaining, landscaping and also signage proposed on site. The site is zoned IM1, general industrial, and general industry is permitted with development consent of council. The proposal is considered to be designated development requiring an environmental protection licence on the basis of the annual production capacity. The application identifies that the development will generate 230 heavy vehicle movements per day based on a 26-metre B-double truck. However, due to the delay with the Berrima Road deviation project, the development will be limited to 19-metre trucks, which will increase the number to 314 heavy vehicle movements per day. The proposal was advertised between the 13th of June and also the 13th of July 2019, and there was 5 submissions were received during that period, detailing issues surrounding noise, water and air quality, clearing, traffic, amenity, social impacts, lighting, heritage and ecological impacts. Those matters have been addressed by appropriate conditions of consent on pages 39 to 41 of the report this evening, and the application has been appropriately assessed in accordance with section 4.15 and staff have recommended approval on this occasion.
Thank you. And questions to Mr Wilton? Councillor Turlin.
Yeah, as we were in our briefings earlier today, there's Stony Creek. The distance between here and the boundary line, is that the 40 metres and then you've got the landscaping bay beyond that? Is that how I read this plan?
Through the Chair, that is correct. So there's a 40-metre riparian zone.
So we've got 40 here and then we've got the green landscape.
Additional space in between.
Mate, it's beautiful.
Thank you. Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Mr Wilton, through you, Mr GM, could you just clarify for councillors the actual level of plantings, the vegetation buffers that are being proposed at the moment in this application, including
Mr.
the
Wilton,
creek line and the perimeter plantings? Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Acting General Manager, Mr Wilton.
Through the Chair, there's approximately 5 metres proposed setback landscaping treatment to Berrima Road. On the other adjoining boundaries, there are some setbacks to the riparian corridors I mentioned previously, about approximately 40 metres, and to the other boundaries it's approximately about 16 metres to the north.
Councillor Whipper, you happy with that?
Well, I'm not happy with it,
But I mean, there's no clarification or anything required. Councillor Halstead.
Mr Wilton, through you, Mr Paul, looking at the report, it's pretty clear to me, and also reference to the plan, that there's no stockpile shown, so therefore there won't be any. Any site monitoring would be exactly what Mr Wilton said. And I'm asking you to basically confirm all this at the end of it, because it'll have an EPA licence, as he has indicated, designated development, etc., etc. There's certainly provisions that are quite appropriate there with respect to the soil conservation by way of erosion and sediment control plans, which are necessary and have to be approved. And it's pretty clear to me again, also the riparian zone is 40 metres, even though we can't route it. That's the problem with the A3 plan, but doing a bit of scaling against the road width there. It's got to be 40 metres, so you've agreed. So you'd agree all those things are the situation, wouldn't you?
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Mr Wilton, through you, Councillor.
Through the Chair, that is
Mr.
correct.
Paul.
There is an environmental protection licence which will sit over the top of this site, which the EPA is the regulatory authority. So a lot of those environmental controls will be contained in that document.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, look, the 30-metre wide perimeter planting of native vegetation around the entire lot, if that's an additional condition, you've been to a few court cases, Mr Wilton. What's your best guess on...
You can't ask Mr Wilton.
Well, trying to get
It's a good
best
try.
guess.
Leading the witness, I think you'd call it.
Well, all right, I'll leave it to Councillor Whipper. I think it's in his court.
Thank you, Councillor Turlin.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, you flagged that. Councillor Scandrett.
I'd just like to ask Mr Wilton, dust monitoring systems, is there a way we could condition this that, if required, electronic dust monitoring would need to be installed?
Yeah, look, it's really... I'll allow the question just so you're satisfied, but it is really irrelevant. Mr Wilton, through you, Acting General Manager.
Through the Chair, if a dust complaint is received by the regulatory body, which should be the EPA, that would be a matter for them to obviously request that the applicant undertake dust monitoring in that regard.
Okay, so just to get it clear, the regulatory body is the EPA, not council. And just out of interest, there is dust monitors at the Barrel Brickworks on a continual basis. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Wilton. Just reconfirming the landscaping plan. On Berrima Road, you mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, 5 metres minimum, and approximately the rest of the site, the rest of the perimeter, 16 metres. Is that correct? At least 16 metres? Thank you.
Thank you. So the answer is yes to that?
Yep.
Just for the record. Councillor Turland has moved the recommendation as per conditions and seconded by Councillor Halstead. You've still got another question? You're limited to one, so we've got a mover and a seconder. We're not in debate. Clarification, Councillor McLaughlin?
I'm just wondering if staff are aware that I believe Boral came to council quite a few years ago to get a monitoring station on our water supply tank at the Berrima village.
Okay, so that is that you're making that as a statement.
Well, I believe that's the case. I don't know if council staff are aware of it.
We'll leave it at that.
So there is
that's
monitoring.
What you believe,
yeah,
that there is monitoring. So we have a seconder, which is Councillor Halstead. Councillor Turland, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Page 90. Quite clear there's dust or there's polluting monitoring data is to be taken as per the EPA licence. I don't think there's much to be concerned about this. The beauty of this is jobs for the Shire, which is desperately needed, 30 odd jobs full time. It is actually our industrial zoned area, which is fantastic. I understand there's been negotiations with Austral, which allows us to complete our overpass at a later stage, so that's a benefit to the community, another big benefit to the community. I can't see any disadvantage with this particular development approval and process. They already have the quarry licence further around the corner, which has been altered in 2017, I think he said. So it ticks all our boxes. There's not one that it doesn't tick. It's already the 40 metres back from the creek, Stony Creek, and then there's another probably 15 or 16 metres of landscape zone all through that area. So it's a bonus to the Shire. I commend the applicant and I hope that they do really well.
Thank you, Councillor Turland. Speaker, Councillor Whipper.
Mr Mayor, I'd just like to move an amendment, if I could. And that amendment would be the motion as printed, but that Council introduce an additional condition of a 30 metre wide perimeter of native vegetation, plantings and a 60 metre wide habitat corridor along Stony Creek to this approval. So that would be an additional point.
Okay, that's the amendment.
If I have a seconder.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Scandrett, so you may speak to it.
So I think, councillors, that that this really is I think in the overall scheme of things, it's a minimal impost in terms of certainly adding to the ability to increase wildlife corridors and habitats. I believe that's critically important. Also, just allowing those buffers along Stony Creek and the ability to encourage more habitat for biodiversity as well. I heard the applicant say that they're mitigating any dust with water. Well, we know that water is very scarce. We know it's a precious commodity. I'd rather see that water going into dams and into people's glasses for drinking and onto farms rather than just to suppress dust. So I think if we can increase the perimeter planting of native vegetation, endemic species, I think that that would mitigate some of those problems. Also, we're talking about noise, so that sort of barrier, that perimeter barrier, would soften the noise impacts as well, and also diffuse any light spill. I know there's a condition here to reduce light spill, but nevertheless, it still drifts. So if we could mitigate that to a further degree, I think that would be appropriate. So, councillors, as you heard, the objectors are not objecting per se against the approval of the development, but quite rightly, they want to protect their health and the health of the environment, and I don't see that that's a problem. If we can't make that minor modification, then I think we're missing an opportunity for a number of reasons. And we were told by the representative that he couldn't give any undertaking to agree to that tonight. So therefore it's up to us to introduce, if you like, that additional condition of consent. If they wanted to challenge that, I think that would not be in good faith. I think in fact it would be in bad faith, given that we're trying to sort of create a healthy environment. We do believe in our biodiversity, we promote it. So here's our chance, councillors, to commit to the protection of our residents and our environment by a simple amendment. So I'd ask you to support that.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, I'll speak against the amendment on the basis, Mr Mayor, that basically what we're looking at here is basically a paddock with a couple of trees on it. To try and establish something that hasn't been there for 50 years, I mean, this is an enterprise corridor. I think what has been put forward, and I hear what the community say, and great, that's fine. But I think 40 metres is more than ample in landscaping. And as was pointed out, if you provide all this extra space to grow native trees and so forth, you have to then look at the fire risk, access and egress of workers. Look, if you were in a very, established area that was full of bush, I would be going along with this. I wouldn't like to see it destroyed. But basically, this is farmland. This is open farmland. It's been like that for a long time. I'm sorry, I can't support this. I think what the applicant are putting up, and I think Councillor Nelson is right, to impost something like this on a development of this stage where this council for many years has looked at supporting work and investment and jobs in an enterprise zone. So I'm sorry I can't go along with this because I think it undermines our whole push as a council to have an area which is zoned industrial, heavy industrial. For instance, Borrell, that was been there for 80 odd years, it used to have the village that went right up to the back door of it. And what they did, they removed all those houses to give a buffer to the village. They planted trees. They're continuing to plant trees. They do their best as corporate citizens out there to try and make it as pleasant as they can. And I'm sure the developers here at Austral will do exactly the same. They are a long way from the village, really. Between the village, there is, I think, the cricket ground, and then Borrell's got some more land there. it's a fair way to the village. So I think to be impacted and a few extra trees, I think 40 metres, sorry Mr Mayor, I'm going with the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Look, I'd like to ask if the mover and seconder, Councillor Turland and Scandrett, no, that should be Halstead.
Yes, I think that would be the way to go.
Yeah, the seconder. If they would put Councillor Whipper's point where it says that council request the applicant to, and if we see a 30-metre wide perimeter of native vegetation, etc., etc. If they would accept that, we'll ask the applicant to consider the 30-metre wide and see if we can test the water that way with the applicant.
Councillor Turland, will you accept that?
Well, it's only a request.
It's only a request. That's all I'm asking. At least it gets it. I can see
Okay,
where it might go.
wait a minute. Councillor Turland, Councillor Halstead.
Look, I don't have a problem with the first part of it, but I certainly would think it's totally unnecessary to talk about the 60-metre bit. I mean, if you achieve the 30-metre perimeter of native vegetation, I can support that.
Yep, okay. I'd be happy to delete that bit, Mr Mayor.
Okay, so it is a request. If they take it up, then everybody's happy.
Yep.
If it doesn't, then that's subject to the DA conditions. Then no, it's not no. You're not reading it. It is a request.
Can I ask a question to start?
You can ask a clarification, but not a question.
If I may.
Councillor Nelson, Councillor Turland.
The clarification I've got is to ask is, can they use the reporting zone of Stony Creek as part of the...
I'm not going to allow it. Sorry, Councillor Turland. That can affect the debate.
Now, I'm happy to...
Councillor Turland.
Speak to the motion, Mr Mayor, because last night we received the correspondence and today we received correspondence. And in the first correspondence, just noting that this is the first time that I've heard climate change linked to a proposed development before council. And also, this is a development...
Councillors, please.
Thanks. This will be a development that will employ 38 people. So that could be 38 families, Mr Mayor. But in the second correspondence, just for, I'll give the other side a chance to explain what they've written. He's a resident of Berrima. He said the Southern Highlands region in general and the Berrima-Mossvale area in particular is renowned for its fresh air, its beautiful landscapes and historic villages, its quiet, star-filled skies by night. So he's listed out a number of issues that concern him in the reduction in air quality, increased nuisance value and health risks to airborne particles, increased noise pollution, especially during the early evening and at night, when the ambient noise levels are reduced and the peace and quiet can potentially be enjoyed. Increased visual pollution, much along the same lines as the visual eyesore that the Boral Cement Works has created. Increased lighting pollution resulting from illumination of manufacturing plant and in turn detrimentally impacting upon the view of the nighttime sky. And a couple of points that he raised that the applicant might take into consideration is, I question what is to be done with the vast amounts of rainwater that it would be possible to harvest from the rooftop of the proposed huge building. I don't think I saw anything in the staff's report to that concern. He also asked, I question as to whether the vast rooftop area of the proposed huge building has been considered as a site for solar collection, which, together with a battery storage system, could be used to power the proposed plant. And I didn't see anything in the officer's report about that either, Mr Mayor. And this person also goes on to talk about a substantial screen planting designed so as to visually screen the proposed concrete plant in both the short term and the long term, capture dust and other airborne contaminants. So it's a lengthy letter. I've picked out a few of the pertinent points from the letter. I hope that the applicant heard that, particularly the rainwater usage and solar collection. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Any other speakers? Then Councillor Andrews.
First on, Mr Mayor, if I may, please, just a point of clarification. And I don't need to ask this, but I will anyway. I assume that there is no compunction by the applicant to, I'm talking about the recommendation, by the applicant to, it's only a consideration. He can throw that point one out, correct? Point two, sorry.
It's a request. It's not part of the application. It is just a request to ask would they consider a 30-metre buffer as plantings.
Okay, well, I'll be supporting the recommendation. And if I may speak on the recommendation, the 16 metres I spoke about and got clarification or confirmation from staff earlier on 2/3 of the perimeter is more than adequate. If it had been suggested we stretch that to 20, I'd probably agree with it. And if I just re-emphasise Councillor Nelson's point about, and congratulate the applicant, we've been screaming for this type of development in this area. 38 families, potentially 38 families employed there. We should be proud of this and should support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And before you have the right to reply, if you need one, Councillor Turland, I'll be supporting the recommendation. As has been pointed out by various speakers, we went through a lot of discussion back in the 2004-8 council to declare the Mossvale Enterprise Zone. This is one of the biggest and most major developments within the zone since we have done the rezoning. Hopefully it will continue to develop, and as such will attract, as councillors have pointed out, families and businesses to grow and prosper. So I'll be supporting it without any compunctions at all, and just note that there is another 1,000 acres out there which we hope will be developed, and I really don't want every development that goes in to come back to council for major discussions and debates when we have earmarked this area for light industrial use. I put any right of reply, Councillor? And I put the recommendation. All in favour of the amendment, sorry, we do have an amendment. All in favour of the amendment, please raise your hands. Councillors Whipper and Scandrett. Those against? I declare the amendment lost. I now put the motion. All in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. Unanimous say for Councillor Whipper. Thank you. And we move now on to, and all the very best to Austral, and get those wheels turning. 11.1, page 97, the investment report.
Move that
moved
way,
by
Mr. Mayor.
Councillors McLaughlin and Nelson. Any discussion to the investment report? Then I put it. All in favour. Those against? Carried. Development application 20-43, the use of self-contained seniors housing dwelling as an exhibition home is approved in stage 1, and the recommendation from staff is that it be approved.
Mr. Mayor?
Do you wish for a introduction?
No.
I'll only need one councillor to say yes. Yes, Councillor Scandrett. Mr. Wilton.
Through the Chair, the purpose of this report is to consider DA 200043, which seeks development consent for the purpose of an approved seniors housing dwelling as an exhibition home on 2/18 Centennial Road, Bowral. Councillors will be aware that the Joint Regional Planning Panel approved DA 171822 as a regionally significant development in early 2019. The proposal included a concept master plan for the site and also construction of approximately 135 seniors housing dwellings over 2 stages. The current development application before council this evening seeks to alter the use of one of the dwellings for the purpose of an exhibition home and also a sales office, including car parking for a maximum period of 5 years. The site is zoned R5 large lot residential, and exhibition homes are permitted with development consent. The proposal was neighbour notified to 35 surrounding properties, and no submissions were received on this occasion. Accordingly, council staff recommended approval subject to conditions.
Okay, questions to Mr Wilton?
Thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Mr Wilton, you say that that this was neighbour notified to the neighbours. I was an objector to this and I didn't get a neighbour notification. I was wondering who else got one.
Councillor McLaughlin, thank you. Mr Wilton, through you, Acting General Manager.
Through the chair, if there was a modification to the original DA, which was 171822, any person that lodged a submission in relation to that DA would have been notified of any amendment to that DA. This is a new development application that's been submitted to council, and therefore only adjoining and adjacent properties are required to be notified under council's existing policy.
Thank you. Councillor Turland.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, just before I have a question to Mr Pepping, in relation to the development being approved by the JRPP and then ratified, there has been requests that by the objectors to reopen and reconsider this application for this development. Can you please clarify where that request is up to and whether there is any opportunity for that to continue?
Through Mr Paul, yes, there was a request made by an objector on behalf of a number of objectors to have the development consent reopened or reconsidered by the Joint Regional Planning Panel. As was explained by Council and also by the Department of Planning, that is not an option under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Once a determination is made, it is made. The applicant, the objectors have the right to appeal to the Land Environment Court to have the court to reconsider the consent. Mr Wilton has conveyed those instructions to the objector in question, and to my knowledge, we haven't received any other queries back from that.
Okay, thank you. You're seconding? Okay, now Councillor McLaughlin.
Well, I'll be moving an amendment, and my amendment will be option 2, that it be refused. And if I get a second,
okay, that's a direct negative, so you'll have to do it as a motion arising.
Motion arising
from the recommendation. Okay, Councillor Scandrett.
Yes, look, I'm supporting this.
There'll be a foreshadow.
Yeah, I'm supporting this, Mr Mayor. The development is, in my view, a sound one. And I think to get on with the sales process is probably important, so getting this display home sorted is important. It also means we're going to see the start of the work on the existing buildings in terms of restoring and maintaining those, which I think is quite important. I think that when you're looking at this site, it's been an issue for a very long time, and to see some resolution of it is important, but also to see some opportunity for good quality housing, which in my opinion it is, as presented, for people to choose to move within the Shire. That's what we're looking at here, and hopefully it'll free up some housing stock elsewhere in the Shire. So I'd like to support that and look forward to seeing that commence.
Thank you.
I'll speak against the motion, Mr.
No, you've got to get you can speak against. Yes, but you can. Yes, I'm not. Excuse, steady. Yeah. You've taken a few pep pills up north.
No, I haven't, Mr. Mayor. Look,
but have you got you? Oh no, you haven't. You're going to speak against it, and it's going to be a foreshadowed motion.
Yeah.
Right.
Basically,
let's get it out of the system.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I'm speaking against this development today because, as you highlighted, you were sitting on a JRPP when incorrect information was given to the JRPP that can be actually proven.
Councillor McLaughlin, be very aware. Very aware that is an opinion, and perhaps that's the way you could express it.
It can be proven in fact.
As opposed to a statement.
when an incorrect statement is given to the JRPP and they make a decision on that, and the only way out of it is for the residents to go to the Land Environment Court and spend tens of thousands of dollars to get looked at. I'm saying, Mr Mayor, it's hardly very conducive for people to support a JRPP when there is no mechanism to have something looked at again other than going to court. And for a community to have to do that is a great impulse. But anyway, look, let me just say, I'll say why I'm speaking against this, is because it's R5. Do you know what the objectives of R5 are? Let me read it out. It's in Council's report. To provide a residential house in a rural setting while preserving and minimising the impact on the environment. Now, all these things are in here to ensure the developments in the area does not necessarily increase the demand on the public. Basically, all these things here say why it shouldn't happen, because you're going to have 130 houses on 25 acres. At the moment, there is one house per acre. So how do we compromise our planning and our LEP? What our R5 means is basically it's in a rural setting. It won't be a rural setting anymore once you put 135 houses on 25 acres, believe me. So here we are. Here's the report saying that's the objective of R5. And what are we supporting? We're supporting, I'm not against development, I'm not against seniors living, but I'm also supporting R5 because that's what our zoning says and it should have been taken into consideration. But Waterbrook's lawyer stood up and misled the JRPP. I'm asserting that.
Councillor McLaughlin,
Okay.
I ask you to withdraw that.
I'm not going to withdraw that because
I don't want to. You open yourself up, Councillor McLaughlin. It's not a point of order. I've asked him to withdraw. Pardon? I say I am going to make the response to Councillor McLaughlin that it wasn't council who made the decision to allow seniors living in an R5 zone. It was a state government decision. And as such, that is what has to be taken into consideration. Councillor Scandrett, your point of order is?
Mr Mayor, I'm sorry, it was just that in that, as that statement got very emotional, if Councillor McLaughlin was an objector to the development, why is he speaking?
That is not a point. That is not a point of order. That is not a point of order. Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Some of the things Councillor McLaughlin have said, I think we'd all agree with. But the fact of the matter is that it's out of our hands now. Much like Chelsea Kumanji. I mean, that'll change forever as well. It was taken out of our hands. So what we've got to do is the best we can. And I note that the developer is working closely with council. I do believe that given the current status and the approval by the state government and the planning department that gazumps us, and the support by the JRPP as well, that there are some benefits to this this proposal. If you'd asked me, do I think it's conducive to that area, I'd probably say no. But I think we all have to be realistic and work with the developer to provide good outcomes that are going to have benefits for the whole community. So that's just the way it is. So I'll be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Yeah, look, I'll just support what you've just said then. Once a decision has been made and there is no repeal of that decision, however much passionate you feel about it, then you are best to work with the application and get the best result as possible for the residents, as opposed to just voting it down because you want to vote it down. It's not going to happen. It is going ahead, and as such, I see no problem with putting in an exhibition home for people to be able to see what style of living is going to take place in that precinct. And as much as I disagree with Councillor McLaughlin, he is extremely passionate in relation to this. I think the development, when completed, and one of the town planners said to me, when there was a application came in about a food store as you come into Moss Vale being built, and we got all these complaints from the community, it looks terrible and whatever. Never judge a development until it's finished. And that building looks very sets in now, and I think Waterbrook will as well. Councillor, who moved it? Councillor Turland.
Yeah, look, as you said, it's already been approved by the JRPP. This is just requesting the use of one of the buildings earlier to do as a advertisement exhibition home. So it's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. And it might take 12 months or 2 years for all the applicant to get to the point of where he can actually start work. But he's already been 2 years in the system, and a lot of money he's spent to date. So, you know, it really is desperate. I actually think he should start straight away, because with 38% or 32% of our shire is over 65, we're all heading that way. We're going to all want one of these one day, I would think, if not here, somewhere else in the shire. So I commend the developer. Let's let him keep going.
Now, you haven't spoken, and as such, technically you haven't got the right of reply yet, so Councillor Nelson.
Just a point of clarification. Could this request go back to the JRPP, not to council?
No.
Because it's only just...
No. It has been determined, and as Councillor Whip pointed out, Chelsea Gardens has been determined. It now is council, JRPP, move on. Then I put the do you want to wish for a right of reply now, seeing nobody else has got their light on? No. Okay, then all in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hand. That is, as a planning matter, all councillors save Councillor McLaughlin, who I vote against, and wishes his name recorded. I declare the motion carried, and as such there will be no foreshadowed motion. It's been carried. We move on to 12.2, planning proposal to reclassify a portion of council-owned land to provide access road to the Southern Highlands Regional Gallery. Page 112, and the recommendation is for the that we reclassify it. I'll get a mover and seconder, Councillors Nelson and Scandrett. It really should be Councillor Whipper, I think, out of protocol. Councillor Ms Stannard, we've got a moved and second, but would you like to do an introduction to this, please? Or Mr Wilton, or one of you? Okay, Councillor Turland. Please, Ms Stannard.
Through the Chair. The purpose of the report is to set out the process that would be involved in rezoning or reclassifying, not rezoning, but reclassifying the portion of land that's been identified in a DA to allow an access way through to the Southern Highlands Regional Art Gallery. So it's to set out the process, which would be to do a planning proposal to the department, receive a gateway determination, exhibit that, report back, and then follow through on other requirements that are required under the Local Government Act to have another independent public hearing where any concerns can be independently considered and reported back to Council. In this case, Council would not have delegation to finalise the planning proposal, but that would be done by the Department of Planning.
Thank you, Ms Stannard. Any questions? Then I have one.
Sorry, after you.
After you.
Time period for this to
happen?
Yeah. Same question.
I should have taken the question. Yeah. Ms Stannard.
As efficiently as it can be done, it could take, could be 6 months. It just depends on the timing, getting a gateway determination from the department, and then how that links in with the exhibition process, reporting back to Council and so on. There's a minimum time of about 3 weeks that's needed between the end of the planning proposal and the start of the public hearing time. So six months might be generous, but 6 to 8 months.
In the process.
And
okay.
Appreciate the need to do this as efficiently as possible.
Okay, so is there any further questions of Ms Stannard in relation to this? Councillor Scandrett?
Yes, in terms of the cost of preparing this planning proposal, could you just indicate what that would be and where that is to come from? Thank you.
Ms Stannard?
Well,
Well, it's staff time, and how long is a piece of string? Not very long in this case.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm hoping that there'll be support for this recommendation, and it'll be unanimous as well, because we need to get on with this. The only thing that really is holding it up is, this road, and as we know, we're hoping that early 20...
Are we asking you a question, Councillor?
Oh, no, I didn't want to.
We're in debate, so
Yeah, no,
yes.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought we were.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so we are looking at an opening in 2020, and obviously that is dependent on the road being in place so that we can have access. There's some issues with access through Retford Park itself during the construction phase. I think that will be negotiated and permissible, but when it's open to the public, obviously we want that separate entry. I think a lot of money, a lot of time and effort has gone into this, and just the fact that the working group have raised $6 million, I think shows that there is some public interest in this and commitment. So, and council have been, very, very in the front line of that commitment as well, because we all know that without council support, and from the very beginning, that we wouldn't be where we are now, because our support has certainly influenced National Trust as well, and because of that, it's allowed the project to roll forward and to increase on that funding that $2.5 million that was given by state government. So the sooner this is done, the better, and hopefully it will be a very smooth process. And we'll get on with it.
Yes, it's going to be a major milestone once that consolidation and sale of lots and whatever, consolidation of lots. All right, so we have that as a recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. Councillor Scandrett.
Maybe need to remove that flag, Mr Mayor. It's right in this sight line. I'm sure that's the problem. Anyway.
I didn't put it right. Yeah, I got that then. I'll move the flag. Yes. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, supporting the art gallery, I might have my problems with the funding from council side of it, but this one is absolutely good. And the resolution of council in September last year was very clear that this road is to be constructed at the expense of the art gallery enterprise. So that's fine. This is a no-brainer.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett, and will be a straight road and will not do a U-turn. Now, I shall put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. It's carried unanimously. We go to 12.3, planning proposal to reclassify some land in Kirkham Street to enable future sale. Move Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Andrews. It is for approval as such. Put it all in favour. Please raise your hand. That there was unanimous as a planning matter. We move to public exhibition of draft community engagement strategy. Councillors, we had a... Have I jumped one?
Page 123, short-term rental accommodation draft policy.
It is two. Thank you, Mr Acting General Manager. 12.4, short-term rental accommodation draft policy framework. Do you need to move Councillor Turlin, second Councillor Whipper? No need for an introduction. Then I put it. All in favour? We've got two lights on. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Look, I was going to move that we went for the 180 days rather than the 360, and if I get a second, I'll respect that.
Mr Mayor, I'm going to withdraw my seconding for this and put my seconding behind the amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we have the motion, and now if you're redrawing, this will be the motion. Then we'll have to have an amendment.
No, if somebody else wants to support the original motion.
Okay, who moved the original motion? Councillor Turland and Nelson. They're not going to, so yours will be an amendment.
Okay, happy for there to be an amendment.
Okay, so the amendment be reduced from 360 to 180?
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
So everybody's clear, it all reads the same, other than the time frames for short-term accommodation is reduced. I'll ask Councillor, you happy to... Okay, Councillor...
thank you. Look, I'm not against... We all know where this is going. Short-term rental is taking over. We won't see B&Bs anymore, Mr Mayor. All that is disappearing. We know this is a new world. People do it. But people do buy in an area for a certain amenity. And I think they're entitled to have a property next to them that's not short-term, 365 days a year. I think it's 365 a year, am I correct? And I think, really, this sets a bit of an opportunity for people to still do it, because most people are just on the weekend or through the week for weddings and so forth. And I think it puts a bit of a break on the situation where there are some concerns within our community, and you've only got to go to places like Byron Bay and different places up the coast where party houses, and we've seen them here, Mr Mayor, and the great majority of these houses are done properly. I do agree, and that's fine. But those ones that continually give us problems and neighbourhood problems, and people pay their rates. They're entitled to a certain amenity in a certain area. They buy into an area. They don't select to be next to someone that's going to have a short-term rental that's got people coming and going for 365 days. And sometimes they block up the whole street. Sometimes they're rowdy, they're noisy, they don't take any consideration for the neighbourhood sometimes. And I think we just need to take this on board. 180 days is a lot of days that someone can still make money, and they're paying just ordinary rates like everyone else, but yeah, they're taking advantage. Now, I think it's good that we've put a recommendation in and we've looked at it, and Council is very concerned about the controlling of this, because we all know that unless this body that's going to oversee this are funded correctly, it's going to be a nightmare. And who will they ring up? Who will they blame? They'll blame Council. And what is Council? All we can do is say, sorry, ring the police. That's all we can do. When there's a party going on next door, we have got in place a process, but it's a voluntary process that we ask people who do this so that there's a number on there, so if there's a complaint, we do all the right things, but we won't be in control of this. If we throw it out for 365 days a year, and the controlling body way down here in rural New South Wales will really have no teeth, I don't think, and we're going to see a lot of the community upset. So we're not taking it away, we're still saying the people that want to do that, that's fine, but we're just limiting it. So I just hope, councillors, you'll think about this and think that this is a relatively good compromise, that, you know, we aren't saying no, but we're saying there's got to be a few restrictions on this.
Well done, Councillor McLaughlin. The bill went as you summed up. Yes, Councillor Scandron.
Mr Mayor, thank you. The councillors, in my view, are caught between a rock and a hard place here, because we want that midweek tourism that Airbnb and the like brings, and we want that overall economic activity that runs from that. But yes, you're quite correct. It comes at a cost, and not only does it come at a cost in terms of we'll end up being the ones that are blamed for this, we're also going to be the ones that are suffering the lack of affordable accommodation that has been soaked up by this demand in this industry. So that's why I continue to support affordable accommodation proposals such as the one in Mittagong, Mr Mayor, maybe 300 units there, and so on, so we get an expansion of privately operated affordable accommodation in the Shire. This concern that we have with this, having to lodge this today with the state government, is we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. and that's really the problem with this one. I'll be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Scandra. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I'll support the recommendation also. And I just want to highlight what the staff have brought out in the report, where on page 128 they're talking about where they're making the following recommendations on the draft regulatory framework, because you could see council being caught, those 4 dot points there, where we're asking that the Department of Fair Trading be sufficiently resourced to manage complaints in an effective and timely manner, including in regional areas, that's us, that the Department of Fair Trading undertake a community education process to ensure that the broader community understand the complaint handling process for the short-term residential accommodation, that the Department of Fair Trading ensure that the proposed regulatory framework does not include the burden on councils to deal with and manage the impact of short-term residential accommodation, that in addition to providing contact details to adjoining owners, industry hosts also provide a complaint protocol which outline the process to making complaints to the Department of Fair Trading. Now, that's not written in yet, but we're hoping that they'll take notice of that when we present our submission, because Councillor McLaughlin's right. You know, unless there's a process in there, unless the Department of Fair Trading can handle it properly, it'll come back to council. They'll be ringing council, we've got this complaint. And already we've got people living in a shed illegally while they rent out their house in Bowral. So, you know, other little things are happening as well in regard to short-term rental. So, yep, I'll be endorsing the the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm supporting the amendment for 180 days. I understand realistically that tourism benefits from this sort of activity, but I'm also aware as well that we as a council, not that long ago, made a submission to the planning department as well, raising concerns about this short-term holiday accommodation rental and the fact that it's taking houses off the rental market, therefore increasing homelessness in our community. Now that's a real social issue, and one because we know that people can get more in sometimes in a day than they would in a month, you know, for renting out places on the holiday market. That really leaves a section of our community very vulnerable and without access to accommodation. And that impost is growing all the time. So my reasoning for this is that if we allow somebody 365 years a day to make money, as compared to 180, it may be more viable for them to look at putting those houses back on to the rental market. I've stood around this table on numerous occasions and spoken about our concerns about homelessness and, you know, social poverty and all those issues, and it's not getting any better. We know that. So I just see it a bit of a double speak. That in one breath we'd write off to the department, so we've got concerns because of this, and now in the next breath we're saying, oh, forget that, we've got no problem with this. So on principle, I'd have to support at least the compromise, and hopefully that those people that are considering putting houses on the market as holiday accommodation 365 years might rethink it and allow opportunities for people to source accommodation where they can live with their families. Simple, like that's not too big an expectation, is it? So there may be some compromise point, and the government may need to look at that. You know, and again, it's like everything we do; it's nothing more than tokenism. But I think at the end of the day, each individual has to be true to their own conscience, and in this case, I can't support you know, that 355 days of you know, possibly throwing somebody out onto the street.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, it's a classic case of open slatter as far as I'm concerned. This council has been inundated with complaints, one way or another. Councillors individually, I'm sure you've had your share of them as well, in terms of people that rent out these dwellings, or parts of dwellings, to people that, in most cases, twice the amount you'd normally expect there. One case I can recall, 8 cars over a weekend on a regular basis. This is the sort of thing that you would not expect anywhere, let alone here. But what are we confronted with? A submission on a government proposal, which I'm sure they'll just ram through, so it will be absolutely no use whatever happens here, or from any council, in my opinion. I'd be very surprised if anything changes. So are we serious here in suggesting we think that any house, anywhere near you, wherever you are now, you're happy with it being rented out for the whole year? Because that's what this is talking about. What an absolute planning nonsense, and quite frankly, lack of social responsibility at a government level. It is disgraceful. So I'll be supporting the amendment, and I don't think that's even adequate enough, to be honest with you, or inadequate enough, the appropriate amount. So I'll be going for the amendment for that reason.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Councillor Turlin. Councillor Halstead.
Sorry. It was a code of conduct that had no bite, no teeth to it. I remember being part back in 2008 or 12 when I became a councillor. There was some problems in Barradoon, and there was no controls and no complaints that anybody could make the neighbours. I think in this, what we've got here is at least we've now got some action, so people can make a complaint through the process, and there is some penalties where before there has been no penalties. I don't know, because it's not in this report, of how many complaints we've had since 2012, but if there was a lot, I'm sure we would have heard them or would have been reported here. So I don't think there's a problem with this. I think it gives it more teeth. And if you're with Airbnb, for instance, and you get 3 or 4 bad reviews, you are taken off. You can't use Airbnb, that process. So I imagine the other internet outlets will have the same thing. So if you get a bad review, you're gone. You're then out by yourself on your own process to try and rent that property. And those properties will probably come back to the marketplace because they can't go through the Airbnb system. So I don't think it's a problem. I think this is the next best step to having some control where we had no control in the last 8 years.
No further speakers. Okay, before I'll be supporting the recommendation. Councillor Turland is right. This will at least give a series of guidelines. The only thing I'd perhaps like to see is on the front of each house that is being rented out, that do not contact council, do contact Department of Fair Trading, because I think Councillor Halstead is right in this regard. They will have their own template, and the main thing is that we are not seen as the responsible authority, if there is. But to be fair, I don't think, and I haven't asked staff, but the level of complaints has dropped as far as I'm aware of. You will always, like any neighbourhood, any next door neighbour, you can get the neighbour from hell, or you can get a terrific neighbour, and every now and then there could be a bad rental in relation to short-term accommodation. So, but I'll support the recommendation. It's been done, I hope, and I believe though, with the diligence of staff, and we will see how it goes. But the identification for complaints, I think, should be made very public somewhere on the property that's being let out. Any other than no right of reply, then I put...
Would you want to put in one of them the recommendation that a sign be placed on the properties advertising? And to make it enforce it? Will we enforce it?
Well, that's a clarification. Could...
I haven't got the code in front of me, so I don't know what it's...
We'd have to take that on notice.
We
Be able to enforce it.
we could take that on notice, and it could come back as a suggestion from staff at a later date. Can that be done?
We could put it, if it's not, we could put it in as part of it.
Okay, subject to the code allowing it, then that be added. That identification and complaints be notification be placed somewhere on the property, viewable by the public.
So people can make a complaint if they wish.
Yes. So if you're happy to accept that, then we can do that as an addition. That signage indicating compliance issues or complaints be placed on the front of the property, viewable by the general public. And if that needs tidying up by staff, then you'll understand that.
To receive. No, this signage. Well, it needs to go up in the signage indicating the relevant authorities for compliance issues.
Okay, we've got the gist of that rather than, I put the amendment initially. All in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. Councillors Whipper, Halstead and McLaughlin. Those against, Councillors Andrews, Scandrett, Turland and Nelson and Gare. I declare the amendment lost. I now put the motion. All in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. The same way, Scandrett, Turland, Nelson, Andrews and Gare. I declare it passed. And we now move on to 12.3. 12.5, are we?
Yep. Page 138.
Oh, love it, public exhibition of draft community engagement strategy. We had a briefing this afternoon. You have Ms. Cooper here if you wish to ask questions. It is to the recommendation is that the strategy be placed on public exhibition. Do you need any further comment from Ms. Cooper?
I'd like to...
Okay, Councillor McLaughlin, you've been away too long. A quick introduction. I like a quick question. Ms. Cooper?
No, we need to get that fixed.
Yeah.
Working?
Oh,
it is.
Yeah, it is there.
The community engagement strategy is now 5 years old and due for review. So we know that the references, the demographic data and information about technology use within the strategy needs updating. A desktop review of statutory changes, policies and other strategies has identified several new accountabilities such as the Wingecarribee Disability Inclusion Action Plan, New South Wales Information Commissioner's Charter for Public Participation and new requirements in the Crown Land Management Act. Consultation data and responses received for a 2018 survey generally confirmed that the approaches outlined in the strategy are still appropriate. So the objectives remain relevant and no change is proposed there. We have, however, identified specific aspects of listed actions which need improvement, and these are outlined in the report. The strategy review coincided with an amendment to the EP&A Act, which requires councils to prepare a community participation plan for land use planning matters by the 1st of December 2019. Section 2.3 of the Act gives councils the option to prepare a standalone plan or include the requirements in a community engagement strategy. And rather than create another document, we included pages within the draft community engagement strategy, which clearly set out when and how council will engage with its communities across all of the planning functions it performs. The report recommends a public exhibition period of 28 days.
Any questions? Councillor Scanlon?
Mr Mayor, I'm going to move the motion, but I do have a question.
Yes.
And that was in relation to 1D on page 140, Ms Cooper. Could you just confirm that we are still not considering having any budget consultation on each year? Because that's a fixed event.
Look, I'll answer that. That's something that could be considered in the future. I wouldn't say that that's a definitive no or yes.
All right.
It's
So
full-time.
should we leave that in, Mr. Paul, then, 1D, because...
I think it's fine.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Moved Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Halstead? Right. So you're happy to second?
No, not really.
Not that it goes on we're only going on exhibition.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
Councillor Halstead. Any discussion? Put it all in. Oh, Councillor Whipper this time.
So, Mr Mayor, yeah, look, I'm happy for it to go on exhibition. I'm sure submissions will come in, but these are not necessarily my opinions, but I did receive some correspondence and said I'd raise this in this forum tonight. First, the correspondent did say that they're happy that it's going on exhibition for 28 days, but they did state that they are concerned that they have rarely received a response to their submissions previously when they've made submissions on things like draft operational budget, the animal shelter, Chelsea Kamunji, and also that they're saying that there's a general feeling in the community that appears to be to the point around responding to any council. They're questioning the value in responding to any council policy, decision, event, activity, as the perception is that it's just binned. Now, I don't believe that, but that's a perception in the community, and I'm hoping that through this consultation process that we can make it very clear that that we do value those submissions and that it is a process that we take to heart and give it due consideration. So these are just some preliminary thoughts. I'm sure some other submissions will come in, but I thought, given that I was requested, that I would flag that so that when we go out to exhibition, we can maybe sort of go out on the front foot and just assure the community that we do listen to those submissions and they form a valuable part of the process. One example is the Environment Levy in the Regional Gallery, where we did listen very strongly to that voice in the community and responded in a positive fashion. So I just think that it's good to have that, maybe a heads up on that, so we can, because I know that we do our best in terms of communicating and with our residents, because that's what we're here for.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper, and thank you, Ms Cooper, for your input. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, look, just supporting what Councillor Whipper was talking about, that we do acknowledge and receive representation and take notice. I mean, the one I read out today was received today during our information sessions, and I took the time to read it and bring out the issues that were of concern to the person. And last night we received representation, and you know, getting home after 9 o'clock, I took the time to read that too. So you know, I think they should take heart that councillors are taking notice of them. Whether they make the right decision or not is another thing, but we are listening to the community and take notice of them.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Scandrett.
Just summing up, Mr Mayor, I mean, this review is in fact a litmus test on itself, because this is about how the engagement will work on the engagement policy. And I just look forward to seeing the community respond. I know the staff are doing, have got a broad program in terms of promoting this, so let's see how it goes.
Thank you. I think that can close off the debate nearly, except for Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, no, look, I'll just make a quick comment with regard to, I think this is great, and I think it's amazing, Mr Mayor, how things have moved on just in 5 years. You know, where we've gone from not having mobile phones or smartphones to having Snap Sense Solve, where rather than, you know, ringing council and putting in a complaint or ringing a councillor, and when you get on the line now, while you're waiting to talk to someone, it tells you, you know, if you've got a concern. I think it's a great tool that the community can use, where they can use their own mobile phone, take a photo, they get a report, they get the number, and then when it's actioned, they get a feedback. So it saves a lot of time, and I think it's a great tool, and I think a lot of the community are now using it, and I think we've seen from the report that Ms Cooper has brought forward with regard to that, the use in the community has been exceptionally improving and going up. So I think it's more efficient to do it this way. Suddenly we know about things before we have to go and look at them, because we've got eyes and ears and the community out there. So well done. I think this will be well received.
Good on you, Councillor McLaughlin. Then I put the recommendation. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Those against? Carried unanimously. 12.6, request for financial assistance from bikes for bikes.
Question.
You going to?
Question, Mr Mayor.
Yep.
The applicant making the request, was he this year's Citizen of the Year?
Yes.
I probably find it pretty hard to knock this back, so I'd be pretty happy to move it.
I would, and second Councillor McLaughlin. Look, we have been supporting this for now probably close on 10 years, I would think, if somebody can give me some idea. I think until otherwise, it goes into base budget, because each year we get it and we're not going to knock it back. It's $1,000 that is used to give disadvantaged children, and yeah, so I think from now on, until this program stops, and it be worded that until this request or the program ends, then this be part of a base budget. Stops it coming back here, because we're going to approve it, and it's a great story on an annual basis. Councillor Turlett.
Yeah, the only thing is that if we're going to do it, it should come out of the contingency fund, so it's not coming out of, why can't we take it out of the contingency at $25,000 a year? Otherwise we've got to find another 1,000, we've still got 25,000 coming in contingency, so maybe we should drop the contingency to 24,000, and therefore it's a nil change to the budget.
Councillors, I think you leave that to when we get to the budget for 2021. I don't think $1,000 is going to probably damage a $130 million budget, but anyway.
No, I think well, one could ask some questions of where we don't do it really well.
Well, as I say, until you can bring that up during the Finance Committee for. Yeah, be part of the annual budget. Yeah, good idea. So moved by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor McLaughlin. No, just leave it at that. Oh, for this year? Yes, for this year. That for this year it comes out of the contingency vote, and that in the future it be a base budget item. Okay, any discussion? Great program. Put it, all in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Mr Radowitz. Local Government Election 2020.
I'll move this, Mr Mayor.
Okay, so the what it's basically saying is the council find a suitable person to run our elections. Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Halstead. Is there any discussion? Councillor Halstead, Councillor Scandrett.
Just briefly, I note that the recommendation I've just moved, Mr Mayor, allows the council and the community to consider polls and constitutional referendums, and I'm sure we'll be looking at that shortly.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Turlett.
Yeah, just so the public can know who's watching this fantastic show tonight, there's $375,000 going to be spent just to see a bunch of councillors sit around the table. I only hope this time we get a few females, and that would be, it's been reported in the paper in the last few weeks, so one would hope to think that we do get one or two to balance the system, because we're not all male chauvinist pigs in here. It's just the way it goes. It's just the way it goes. Nobody stands.
Well,
Nobody stands. Well, the bully part, I'm probably right. I am one of those. But $375,000 is going to cost the community, so I'd love to see a good variety of different candidates come. It's important that we do get the variety of people. You can be one. Good.
Yes, everybody wants change as long as it's not you. Okay,
I
Councillor
can't-
Nelson.
I can't let that go, Mr Mayor. Look, this will be money well spent, because the alternative is that council staff do it themselves. And having been involved in local government elections since I was 19, then I think I know that this is the right way to go with an organisation that are doing the majority of councils. So that's a good recommendation to adopt.
And just to top it off, I can remember back in the 90s, the voting was done up, the counting was done up here, and all the piles were put around the table. It was mayhem at its best, but the result was the same. Those who were voted for got elected. It's just that now, instead of $90,000, it's $360,000. It's a huge. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, if I can just sing, we've broadened this debate a little bit about candidates and so forth. What I'd like to see is really some younger people come on council. But you know what the problem is? The problem is they can't afford to do it. Most people, if you're a professional person and you put your time in to be a councillor, you can't pay your mortgage and do all the things that you would necessarily do to fulfil the role. And it's all right for us, or Councillor Scandred, when he stood up and said, I don't need to take 3% and what have you, and grandstand about not taking the money, but the money really is important for a young person to be able to sit here and be able to do the job. I mean, I've approached somebody to take my place in council, and he was an ideal candidate. And he would be very interested in doing it, but he came to me and said, I can't afford to do it. I really haven't got that much time to give up every Wednesday virtually, as we have an information session nearly. We have one Wednesday a month off, read the business paper and spend all that time. You know, you go to Queensland and you see, I know it's a different system up there, but they are paid full time. I know they've got big electorates, a whole different scheme. It's nothing like this. But to think about that, and I think it's something to take to the conference, if you're going to get young people onto council, you have to be able to pay them a reasonable amount of money for their time. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Scandred.
Yeah, just summing up, Mr Mayor. Look, I mean, in a way,
No,
I've
you
sort
may
of...
not be summing up. Did you move it?
I moved it, Mr Mayor.
If you're moved it, then you can speak to the motion.
Yes.
And you're not necessarily summing up, then you can give it to Councillor Whipper and you can have your right of reply.
Oh, okay. Well, look, I'll just speak to it and then come back. Yes, that's what you just told me to do. Yeah.
He can do that. That is, yes, I know. If he wants to speak twice, then he still has that.
Well, I wasn't planning to. Here we go. This is, you're quite correct, Councillor McLaughlin. You know, you've got to put the time in. You've got to make the time available. We need the diversity, absolutely. We need the change in the council to refresh the demographic, because we're well, I think I'm the youngest and you're the second youngest, just, aren't you? Anyway, that's the whole point. Time to change, and also the life experience of the candidates is also important. I had a circular from the OLG recently, Mr Mayor, offering training for prospective candidates, information sessions. They're outsourcing. I'll send it in to you with a suggestion we put it up at the next meeting, because I think we should fund such a thing, so that people out in the community, and there are people out in the community looking at running for council, can come along and hear the inside story, what's involved, everything Councillor McLaughlin's talked about.
Completely, Councillor Scandred.
Sorry?
I say don't turn them off completely.
Well, it was my intention to encourage them, Mr Mayor. I certainly don't want to deter them. I want people to get involved and refresh this council, reset it if you wish.
Thank you. Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Well, the conversation certainly has broadened. It sounded more like electioneering to me than anything else. But I do agree, and I've been on council a while, like you, Councillor Gare, and this has been the first term of council where there haven't been any women in the chamber, and it's very noticeable. I mean, you know, we do need that balance. We do need young people. But, you know, youth is not always a question of age. You know, I work in an industry with a lot of young people, and sometimes their mindset is older than mine, believe it or not. You know, so I think, you know, the right people have to come to the table for the right reasons. You know, it would be good if we saw the council had some sort of mentoring scheme in place for young people, because we have had experiences of young people sitting around this table and it's really daunting, you know, and it can have a personal impact on people's life, their emotions, their anxiety levels. We know all of that. So in terms of mentoring, it might be good for young people to have the opportunity to get a taste of it before they make, you know, those commitments that sometimes can be all-consuming. And, you know, we need to look at gender mix as well. And, you know, we're a very liberated society these days, so we do need to reflect that around this table. So I just encourage the right people to stand for the right reasons. That's what matters. And to treat each other respectfully, you know. And in spite of our lack of gender around the table, I think that for a large part this council's worked really well. And I think we've achieved some really good things, and there has been an element of teamwork. I'd like to see that continue, irrespective of, you know, what the gender mix around this table is. But I do believe that we need that feminine aspect as well, because it is really obvious in this chamber that it's not there at the moment.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to say a couple of things. One is, I agree with you totally. There was, and I've said it before in the chamber, so I'll say it again, I approached ladies, as some of other councillors did at the last election, and they didn't want to run because they didn't want to be involved in the toxicity of the previous council. And that cost council. It cost council because women didn't run. Now, those on the outside looking at running for council will also be looking at who is on council, what sort of people they are, and people do not want to be coming in here and being abused and bashed and being had a go at on a regular basis, and that's human nature. The other thing I'd like to raise is the amount of monies that is spent on electioneering. And the state government is now starting to come around that there will be a fund to run state elections. Because my belief is that political donations should not be taken, but as Councillor McLaughlin has pointed out, how in the heck can a 25-year-old run and run a campaign on a nothing? They can't do it. Their profile's not out there. They can't get themselves elected. And about 10 years ago, I asked that no councillor spend more voluntarily, because it can't be legislated, more than I think it was $8,000 per candidate for wanting to run, or per team. Whether that was done or not, I don't know, but I do know, and I'll say it quite up front, my last campaign cost $14,000, and that was funded totally by myself and then Councillor Nelson. So that is something else that has to be looked at by the state government on how donations are given and by whom. And to be able to keep your hands clean, you don't take donations. And I've taken one in 25 years. But not everybody can do it. And I think council might have to, long term, councils look at putting away on an annual basis some monies to take away this where to get that money from. He couldn't afford to do that, and then feeling, is he obligated, she obligated to the person who donated that money. So that is in the ether. It is not. Councillor Scandrick.
I agree with you, Mr Mayor. In fact, I spent about the same as you at the last election, and I've never taken donations, and I've always run a full ticket of 9, including generally about half women. But this is the sort of thing we're looking at here, and I think the report talks about $16 a head is the cost of democracy. That's the cost of administering the election. There's about 28,000 adults in this shire. And we've got some of the emerging issues will be how the State Electoral Office runs the pre-poll, where they run the pre-poll, how many days, because it's both tedious, if I can put it to you that way, for candidates to staff it if it's a few weeks, and it's also probably too long. Electronic votes, workers are an important part of the mix, and they don't certainly want to have a very long campaign. And also the ability to nowadays electronic vote. We saw that in the state election. We haven't seen it in local government. It's got to come. That will have some efficiencies, Mr. Mayor, and I think we should probably pick that up in local government conferences or something there to encourage the transition to there. It's worked at state. But I can't disagree with any statement about committing to do the hours. I can't disagree with that. You've got to do the hours. You're quite correct, Councillor McLaughlin. It's every Wednesday except the third of the month. It is a lot of reading, a lot of getting out and talking to people. And I just hope that people want to serve their community and will do so. I look forward to talking about the other things in the next few weeks as we start to tighten down our own objectives. Thank you.
All right, so we've got a fair bit of physiological debate, and maybe notices of motion might come forward in relation to the debate we've just had. So I put the recommendation. All in favour, please say aye. Aye, carried unanimously. We go on to 13.1 in relation to the legal report, and that is that it be reported, be noted or conducted in closed committee. Councillors? Move which? Move number one, that the information relating to ongoing legal costs and attachments one. Yeah, so you're moving both recommendations, that's what I'm after. Okay, so you're moving the recommendation in full, 1 and 2. Put it, all in favour?
Second.
Seconded, sorry, Councillor McLaughlin. Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Put it, all in favour. Those against, carried. We now move on to 16.1, minutes of the Wingecarribee Floodplain Risk Management Advisory Committee. Somebody on that committee who... Councillor Halstead. Moving it.
Yes, I'll move it, Mr. Mayor.
And Councillor Nelson seconded. Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Fortunately, Councillor Nelson was there as well, and as you see there, he declared an interest because he owned a property adjacent to Whites Creek, but nevertheless was there as a pretty good observer in terms of what's gone down in terms of the structure of what's proposed and the procedures to date. But essentially what it is as I think it makes it pretty clear there, that this is a floodplain risk management study and plan, and that the story is that it will be placed on exhibition for a period of time for people to comment upon. Now, looking at it, it seems to be pretty well done. I can't go any further than that because I'm not going to suggest that I've done any detailed analysis of that and don't have any intention of ever doing one. But it struck me that the people presenting it knew what they were talking about on that day, and I'll talk to you about that, Mr. Paul, later on. But I was particularly impressed with that one, and I haven't always been on this committee, but that was well done on that day. So it's more an information item at this situation.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. It's nice that, that acknowledgement there. Any other discussion? It was moved by Councillors Halstead and seconded Councillor Nelson. Put it, all in favour. Those against, carried. And now we move on to page 184. 174. Minutes of Arts and Culture.
So moved.
Have we got it moved by...
Yep.
I have it, yeah. Moved Councillor Whipper and seconded Councillor Andrews. Thank you. Put it, all in favour, against, carried. Now we're moving on to No questions with notice from Councillor Whipper.
I put this forward, Mr Mayor, just to seek a date for that information session that I did request.
Yes, I think, look, fair enough. I mentioned it, we did not, it did not go forward mainly because it was wasn't in the business paper as such. It was just, I think you raised it with me.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
So
Yeah,
I apologise for that. I had a phone call from a member of the public last week as well,
Okay.
who requested that were we going to do anything as the drought is ongoing. And I said that we will be looking at it, setting a date. So council staff will set a date, Mr Paul.
Look, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Whipper, I guess all I can say is that we will obviously try and schedule something as quickly as possible. It's obviously something that's of concern to the community and you want to see move forward, so we'll try and make that happen as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So
Well, it's not, doesn't need the information. Well, you move the recommendation that council will be, councils will be advised of the date for the above recommendation.
That councillors be advised as soon as possible of the information.
We'll send it, it'll be done before the end of the week.
Yep.
So we know where we're going.
Right.
And what we can look at, staff can bring forward to councillors to discuss.
Right. So if I have a seconder for that.
Yeah,
motion.
Councillor Scandrett seconded.
And just while I'm on my feet, councillors, I know that there's the local health district have actually funded a position, a rural advisory mental health program, which is specifically designed to support people on the land who are doing it tough, to connect them with services. We know that anxiety and stress is sort of a big part of life of people on the land, not only to farmers, male farmers, but certainly wives and families as well. And that is increasing. And, you know, sadly, the statistics for suicide in the local health district, southwest Sydney, we do way up there in terms of suicide, male and youth suicides, very high. And I think it's something we need to address. It may be at the end of the day that council can't do anything more than advocate at a higher level, but I think we've got to give those assurances that it does matter to us and that we're on their side and that we really do need to step up and do what we can. And sometimes just knowing that support's there is critically important as well, because a lot of people on the land are isolated and by choice they're proud people. And sometimes it's difficult to make those connections. So even if it's that, you know, that's no small thing. So I'm looking forward as soon as possible. I did this rural at that information session. Again, I would like to invite this rural advisory adversity mental health worker who might be able to come along. The request was also to invite some representatives off the land to sit down with us. You know, there's 2 or 3 people that we could probably put our, you know, sort of invitations out to that represent the diverse area in the Shire of farming communities. And I think that could be a really valuable information session. Thank you.
If you could pass those contact details on to Ms. Lidgard, that would be
I'll
good.
do that. Okay, thank you.
All right, so moved by Councillor Whipper, second Councillor Scandrett, the information be held in relation to the drought. Then I put it all in favour, aye, against, carried. We now move on to 18.1, notice of rescission of motion, climate change. Councillor, who's going to speak to?
I'll move that.
Move Councillor, well, it's been moved and seconded, so move Councillors Whipper and seconded Councillors Turlin. Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I brought this back because there was an absence of councillors at the last meeting. Unfortunately, we still have an absence here tonight. But I think it's worth bringing back councillors because part of the motion last time was to support the student strike. That opportunity is gone. But I did attend the student strike, and I have left just an outcome of some of the concerns from the meeting. That wasn't the Tooth Fairy that left those, it was me. So it's just a bit of a synopsis of the concerns of people who attended that's rally at Glebe Park. Also, there's a petition that is circulating, and it will circulate until the end of this month, I believe. But already that petition does have in excess of 1,000 signatures as well, supporting council to make a climate declaration. Councillors, I did notice as well that the Australian Medical Association have now said that the rise of eco-anxiety and climate change is having dramatic effects on our mental health too. The association does say it recently declared that climate change is a health emergency, and for the Australian Medical Association to recognise that, I think, is important. In fact, the World Health Organisation regards climate change as the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century, and also that climate change can affect and does affect people's mental health in a number of ways, both directly and indirectly. And we know that people with affected by mental ill health have an impact not only on their own families but communities as well. The resources that are going into people suffering from mental illness these days is astronomical, but not enough. Because, as I just said recently, we know that people on the land are doing it tough. The price of water in some parts of New South Wales and Australia, we know that the reality is there. The water's disappearing and they won't be able to afford water. I mean, that's just outrageous in a country like ours. Just those simple basics of life are disappearing. And the science is there, whether we choose to believe it or not. The science is that we are facing a climate emergency. So, look, I know as well as anyone else, this is just a token. What can we really do? But if we make that token gesture, and every local government throughout Australia made that token statement, then maybe, just maybe, our government would listen and put some things in place. The young people at that rally were very, very passionate. The majority weren't young students wagging school, but those who did, you have to acknowledge their courage and their tenacity, their strength and their insight and their concern and love for the environment that we all prosper from. And prospering from is not only making money or digging resources and coal, or bottling water, but, we benefit just by, having the beauty that we have here and the biodiversity that we share, clean air, beautiful starlight, of a night time. We can actually see the stars. All those things are important. So, councillors, I'm asking you to support the rescission motion.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's not that I disagree with Councillor Whipper, but unfortunately you've got a bureaucratic councillor here, and I believe that there's a right way and a wrong way that to go about this climate emergency, and I believe the notice of motion was the wrong way. In fact, I believe that Councillor Whipper should have consulted his fellow councillors, the Mayor, the General Manager and staff and the Environment Committee, possibly down the track with the local community on this issue. Firstly, I think that he should have consulted with Councillor Markwood, who's on the on the Environment Committee with him. Could have come forward as a joint submission. So I was looking for collaboration. Anyway, this issue should have even probably gone to you, Mr Mayor, and come back as a mayoral minute, but I would have preferred it to go through the Environment Committee. The staff, they haven't had any input into this. They have to sit up there and they're muted. Can't utter a word, Mr Mayor. The Environment Committee should have had first go at this issue. You've got Patricia Hall, Linda McGrath, Paul Shanahan and Clive West, all on the committee. Malcolm Hughes from Water New South Wales, he might have had input into what climate emergency is all about and brought it back here. The Manager of Environment and Sustainability, the Natural Resource Officer. He would have had input into climate change. Mr Mayor, it's not as if climate change happened this week, has it? So, and it's important too, Mr Mayor, that only last June we adopted a budget. So we set up a number of works and priorities and told the staff to get on with it. So if this notice of motion or its rescission motion gets up and we then adopt it, it's going to send the ship in a 180-degree spin, you know, because of the workload involved. And what happened to the precautionary principle? I mean, I've listened to Councillor Whipper for 18 years talk about the precautionary principle. So, you know, so here we go. We've got a new direction set for council, no input from the staff or the Environment Committee. And the role in the Environment Committee, Mr Mayor, is to provide advice and recommendations to council in respect of the delivery of the environment goals and strategies from the council strategic plan, and to discuss and advise on strategic environmental issues. So why hasn't the Environment Committee been doing its job in relation to climate change emergency? And Councillor Whipper's the chair of that Environment Committee. He's the person to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Any other councillors? Councillor Scandrett.
Yes, I was at the rally last Friday, and as a councillor, I felt it was very important to attend there and see what the attendance was and what the messages were and the demographics. The demographics, as you pointed out, Councillor Whipper, very interesting, mostly mature age folk. My guess was out of the 600 odd there, probably 500 were on average 55 or more. Very passionate young people, very passionate people from all walks of life, all politics, all backgrounds, industry, non-industry, retired, working, self-employed, everyone, lots of people there. But I agree with you, Mr Nelson. We need to just go back and get this sorted out behind the scenes. We need to identify the priorities. I think this is the core thing, what you're saying. Discuss that in there through the processes of committee and so on, and then we will come back to our community and report on what we think from what we've learnt, discussed, argued, whatever, are the priorities. There's no doubt in my mind that this community is very concerned about their environment and the world we live in.
Thank you. Councillor Turland.
Well, my 6-year-old granddaughter went to the one in Sydney. Her mother, my daughter, took her on the train from Bondi to the city. I didn't spend a lot of time there because she's only 6 years old. But that's the sort of people that we're protecting. My grandchildren, my children, and my grandchildren are well advanced on what climate change is and coming. It's their future. We're the ones that have stuffed it up, and our parents before us. We need to stand up and actually protect as quick as we can. It is up for us, the councillors.
Councillor Turland.
It is up for us to tell the council and protect the community on what we think is right. Not the staff to tell us to tell the staff that's what we want. And this is clearly asking for a information session, but it also sets the platform for the information for the staff to come back to us. Because the information's out there. There's nothing new about it. You have to have your head in the sand if you don't know what's happening at the moment with climate change. And some of our politicians in the feds don't understand it or don't want to understand it for their own personal reasons. We have to change. This is putting it on the table now. Let's do something now. If Councillor Markwood was here, he would be voting for this, no doubt in the world. As for not going to the Environment Committee, I'm sure you guys have chewed the fat on this a dozen times. And I don't see why it doesn't say necessarily the Environmental Committee, but I'm sure everybody on that committee would endorse this as well. We are elected by the people to make decisions and instruct where we want to go. This motion does that. And I would suggest and hope that you councillors vote on it, because it needs to be put on the table now, not with just let's hold off for another briefing session and be told exactly the same information that's in front of us here. Because if it comes back and says we don't want some of these things, I'll be saying, no, I'm not interested. So I think what you've got is a platform in front of you, putting the staff on notice, this is where we want to go, come back, if this is where we're going in the brief, you come back and you tell us how we're going to get there.
Thank you, Councillor Tell and Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, look, I've sat next to Councillor Gordon Marquardt for this term, and it was only a couple of months ago, Mr Mayor, that he stood up in this place and said, when the time is right, I think I want to bring this forward. I'm disappointed that he's not here to do this because he had flagged it already. And I'd like to see this being unanimous. I don't want to vote against this. I'd like to see it unanimous. But I think Councillor Nelson makes a good point. It should be unanimous. But on the other hand, this council has been doing a lot of work over many years on this issue, and it might not be seen by the community, but what we're doing to minimise our impact and our carbon footprint. Look, as a Labor councillor, I was so disappointed that Kevin Rudd, back there in 2007, had the community on board and said, this is the most pressing issue of our generation. Let's do something about it. And how do you do something about it? You put a carbon tax on carbon. How do you change people's, how do you change the way people operate? You tax those things so people, it generates money to move them out of that area, burning coal or what have you. Now, I worked in an industry that burnt a lot of coal. You know what? They are now looking and have gone away as much as they possibly can from burning coal. They know that coal is going to be phased out. The amount of impact it has on the world's environment is massive. We know that. We've got to change. But I was so disappointed. Kevin O'Rudd, he lost his nerve and he pulled out right when he should have, and he lost government, I think, over those issues. I'd like to see that this be just a unanimous vote and it be bipartisan, because I think as a council, as Councillor Whipper mentioned earlier, this has been a council that's worked closely together and we haven't had a fractured council. And I'd hate to see it fracture over this, because I think I'm a grandparent, like a lot of the other councillors here that have got children. We are concerned about the future, but we have been doing things, and I think to say to staff, boom, we're going to do this now, we have been doing it. I've been here for 3 terms, and I know it had started a way back then, and we have been working towards it. So I'd like to see this, maybe if Councillor Whipple can just withdraw this now and maybe not put this motion out, because I don't want to see anyone vote against it. I'd rather see it be withdrawn at the moment. I'm asking him if he can withdraw it so it's unanimous, because I'd like to think that, you know, I don't want to delay anything, but we are doing things. It is happening now. Council staff have been working on this for a long time, and we have got runs on the board. And as Councillor Whipper said, this might be just, you know, words, and there are a lot of councils that are moving that way and getting on board with it, and I'd like to see us get on it too.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Halstead.
I've heard everything now after that one. I thought, here's a chance. Might actually get Councillor McLaughlin to stand up and be counted on the environment. As a Labor councillor, I'm stunned. Absolutely stunned. And in fact, I'm waiting for you to do something that's actually Labor orientated. I've waited 2.5 years for it. I thought I might be going to get it tonight.
Councillor Halstead,
That's all right. No, I'm entitled to.
Yes.
I'm entitled to debate.
Yes,
Mr.
you
Mayor.
are entitled
That's
to
right.
debate. No, I asked
and
councillors.
he's right in my target at the moment.
Yes.
But anyway, we'll move away from that. And I do look at you the whole time.
Yes, you
Right,
are.
as distinct from
You are
certain
probably
councillors
the
over
only
here.
councillor who's
Thank you.
listened, Councillor Halstead.
Well, you know what? This is a classic Conservative humdrum. You know, here we have a situation which I must say, I look around the table, I say, well, no, this way, these are going to go this way, because they've got the old school, classic, Conservative viewpoint on the environment. That is, there's no problem with it. Well, look around, for God's sake, look around, for God's sake. It's not just what's happening now, it's been what's happening for decades, quite frank. And we've been having plastic bags in the ocean for 20 years that I'm aware of. And what have we done about it? Our government's just thinking about it now. I'm not even sure they'll adopt anything of any worthwhile nature either. Elected councillors need not to be herded into a position by the staff, and quite frankly I think it'd be unfair to be expecting them to in fact recommend anything to us. Because I don't think it's their role, nor would I think, if I was there, I'd want to be doing that. Because that would be a whole batch of personal opinions. No, I haven't read any such thing.
Councillor
Haven't read any
Halstead
such
has
thing.
the floor.
Unlike you may well have, I haven't. But let me tell you, we need to be very serious about the environment. And quite frank, to date, yes, we can talk all about the things we've done. Fantastic. There's no argument. This council has pulled its weight in a whole lot of areas. No one could dispute that. But it's about the wider picture, and local government has to, at some stage, get up and get on the horse and actually, do something that's worthwhile in terms of a decision-making process or help to influence others. And quite frankly, I think that's the problem that we're having. There's not sufficient councils doing that. And in fact, even if you look at various conferences we have, very rarely is anything of any significance carried on the environment, to be quite frank, and I just wonder about that. But my God, here's a case of something that's been put up because it needs to be put up now, not put through a whole lot of committees. We are the elected people, democratically elected people, that can get up and make a statement, move a motion, whichever way it is. Doesn't have to go through a committee on all occasions. What do we want? The classic bureaucratic, as we've already been heard over here from Councillor Nelson. He said, oh, here's the bureaucratic approach. That's exactly what it was. And you'd expect that everything must go through a committee. Well, no. Some politicians actually make decisions based upon fact, based upon processes, and in the case of the environment, quite frank, this is it.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I argued here 2 weeks ago against the word emergency, and I'll do also here in the brief time I have. And the motion from that meeting was to take it away and bring it back in a formal, if you like, information session where all arguments be presented from different people. Bring the so-called experts in and let us hear both sides, because there is both sides, for God's sake. There is science and there is information to the contrary on this word emergency. Take that out, and I'd travel okay with this. This council right now is taking climate change very seriously, as outlined or detailed in our strategic plan. A number of those objectives in that strategic plan have already been carried out. So this council does take it seriously. I just object to the word emergency. It's not an emergency, and there's many facts that will support what I say. Thank you.
Yeah, and before you have your right of reply, Councillor Whipper, Councillor Andrews just then summed it up. We're not arguing about climate change. We're arguing about, believe it or not, the wording, and that is the wording emergency. And Councillor Andrews just raised it. The Community Strategic Wingecarribee 2031 incorporates action on climate change, as been mentioned by Councillor McLaughlin. And we have been doing it for, we established the Revolving Energy Fund back in 2011. And last year we saved 350, I think it might even be more, 350 tonnes of carbon dioxide in putting in LED lighting, which throughout the Shire and solar panels has saved council $56,000. So we have been doing things. We are recycling. We are trying to minimise on waste as much as we can. And Councillor Halstead raised the point then about we can make decisions. Yes, we can. One of those decisions might be a climate levy. We do it with environment levy. To do this properly, you're going to have to resource it. And I don't take away from the resourcing, but I want to get information that how we are going to do it, if you're going to get more serious, because I think we're serious now. And I do believe that we are pulling our weight as a council, and we are going to continue to do so. But I disagree with Councillor Whipper because he said it will be a token gesture. I don't think it is a token gesture what we're doing. I think we're fair dinkum. And if we can get more policies in place without sort of creating this emergency bit and still pull our weight, because I believe in climate stage, and somebody might have heard the CSIRO is now constructing a drilling rig in the Antarctic go down to try and find carbon dioxide levels a million years ago. And now I've seen some of that and it convinced me. So, but the other question is, what are you going to do? What are you personally going to do? Are you going to turn your computer off at the power board every night? Your television off standby? Not drink 2 cups of coffee? Do a day? What are you going to do? Councillor Whipper.
Not eat meat. Where could we go with this? I don't know, councillors, whether it's ignorance, fear or guilt that's stopping you from acknowledging that we're in a damn emergency. Do you know what an emergency is? It's crisis. The bells are ringing. Ms Richardson, do you have that set up? I'm going to hand my right of reply over to some young people. They never get a voice in this chamber. And what I'll say in presenting this is that excuse me, Mr Mayor, you're listening. When your children are crying out for bread, are you going to feed them stones? Now, could we play that, please, Ms Richard?
We take part in the global #climate strike, together with millions of people from around the world. We are sacrificing time in our classrooms to stand united by our concern about the planet, which is dangerously warming. We're striking from school to tell our politicians to take our future seriously and treat climate change for what it is, a crisis. We see climate change as the greatest threat to our civilization. The ramifications of the decisions you make today will be felt by us in years to come. The United Nations tells us that unless we all take action in the next decade, yes, the next 10 years, the impacts of climate change will be irreversible and disaster will manifest in the form of more and more extreme weather patterns, global crop failure, biodiversity decimation, and war and unrest and economic failure. We want politicians to take action to combat climate change today. We want our elected governments to 1. Say no to new coal, oil and gas projects. 2. Power Australia with 100% renewable energy by 2030. Just transition and job creation for fossil fuel workers and communities. We want a future. For the sake of our planet, for the sake of our quality of life, for the sake of peace, for the sake of the children, us, we urge you to take action now. And now we urge you to take action and sign our petition with hope the undersigned students of the Southern Highlands.
Okay. Thank you. So we have the rescission motion as put by councillors Halstead.
Clarification, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
Just a point of clarification that the original motion includes the notice of motion that's detailed in Councillor Whipper's motion.
Say that again, councillor.
The motion that was moved, that they're trying to rescind, takes into account the motion anyway.
Yeah,
we're just having an
no,
information
hang
set.
on, that's part of the debate. So we'll leave that. You've read the recommendation. All in favour of the rescission motion, please raise your hand. Councillors Whipper, Halstead and Turland. Those against? Councillors Scandrett, Nelson, Andrews and Gare. So the vote is in the negative by not voting. It is in the negative by Councillor McLaughlin and will be recorded as such. I declare the rescission motion lost. So I'm now looking for a recommendation to go into close. Councillor Scandrett, Councillor Andrews, any discussion? Then I put it. All in favour? Those against? Carry. Thank you, members of the public, members of the press.